Good morning, everyone. We're so excited to start to welcome you all to the CFAR Scholars Final Research Symposium. This really represents an amazing amount of, I think, hard work from our scholars, and I know they're very excited to share their work, and we're all excited to hear and support it. So, John and I wanted to just open the morning with just a description of the program briefly, and then we'll get to the scholars. My name, for those who don't know me, I'm Karina Marquez. I'm an associate professor here in the Division of HIV, Infectious Disease, and Global Medicine, a physician and researcher, and it's been my honor to co-lead this program with John. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm John Salcedo. I'm also an associate professor. I'm a health psychologist in the Center for AIDS Prevention Studies here.
So let me just walk you through the study brief, or to the program briefly. So what is the CFAR Scholars Program? This program started, this is our third year in this program, and it started, I think it's really based in the CFAR mission, which is a key part is mentoring the next generation of HIV researchers. This is a top priority, and we're really wanting to, I think with this program, expand our mentoring to pre-doctoral students, as UCSF is mostly a master's level and postdoc doctoral program. So with this, around the same time, 2 years ago, CFAR developed, the Center for AIDS Research developed the DEI Pathway Initiative, which was an NIH program developed to support and develop existing programs in the CFAR network to enhance collaboration with historically Black colleges and minority serving institutions, with the goal to continue to support pathways for future HIV scientists from groups that have been historically excluded from science and research in the past. So we started, as I mentioned, 2 years ago. There's more for those who are interested. We've published some of the work and experiences in this project in Jade's. Here's the citation. This program, I think, is comprised of a large number of people who are helping lead the team. So John and I are program co-leads. But I really wanted to thank Lauren Sterling. She is the CFAR Associate Director and really an integral part of the program. So thank you, Lauren. I'm going to start with thanks in advance. And also a huge thank you to Joe Watabe, who's the CFAR Scholars Program Coordinator and does an amazing amount of work for this program. So thank you, Joe, for all that you do. The team also has Monica Gandhi. She's the CFAR director, and then from San Francisco State University, Audrey Paragon-Smith, who many of you know from SF Build, and then Jonathan Fuchs from the CFAR mentoring program. So I'm going to pass it off to John.
Yeah, so as Karina said, for those of you sort of less familiar with UCSF, we don't have an undergraduate program and just a few master's programs. So we really saw this as an opportunity to open the doors and expand access to, who gets to do research at UCSF. And so, but importantly, CFAR is essentially a sister and replication of the SHARP program. So the SHARP program is a separate NIDA HIV summer training program that I have also the pleasure of directing with Dr. Jonathan Fuchs. And so that program, that's in year 12. We just completed year 12. And so given the success of that program and the mentoring and infrastructure of our CFAR, we sort of put those two together and created the CFAR Scholars Program. Sorry, there's a typo. It's actually 12 weeks. The inaugural program was 16 weeks. But through the program, each scholar is paired with an investigator who they're working with on the project. There is a summer seminar series, so lectures 3 to 4 times per week, and we bring in all of our networks, from DPH, from the VA, from UCSF to give a lecture on very specific either methodological talks or content-specific talks spanning the breadth of HIV science. So it's a really great way to not only learn about the science, but meet the people who are leading this work. We have various panels, various tours across sites, the community sites, clinical shadowing here at UCSF. Obviously, they get to work in a group, which is great. And then the mentoring, which is a really big piece. So we want to thank this year's mentors who put so much time and effort. They're all lovely people. And so we're really happy to continue to have them. And especially shout out to Jose and Sophia, who've been in the program since day one. But we also are excited for the new mentors here as well. Sorry, Fania, I misspelled your name. Last slide here is just to thank all the people involved. You know, there's a lot of people behind the scenes who are helping, who maybe you don't see on a regular basis. A lot of emails sent to lecturers and thanking them, and you know, all the physicians and med students and fellows that you shadowed, and sort of the broader network and our funders at NIAID. So with that, Lauren's gonna come up and help me. So I'll just welcome Anshu Paudel, who's gonna be presenting on their work. Great, Anshu. So the title of Anshu's talk is Exploring Substance Use Patterns and HIV Risk Behaviors Among People Who Inject Drugs in Ciudad Juarez, a hierarchical cluster analysis approach. So welcome, Anshu.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. So welcome to the first presentation. Thank you, Dr. John and Dr. Karina, for such a nice welcome and introduction. So again, the title of my project is Exploring Substance Use Patterns and HIV Risk Behaviors Among People Who Inject Drugs in Ciudad Juarez, a hierarchical cluster analysis approach. My mentor is Dr. Natasha Ludwig-Barron, and get started. So I just graduated with my Bachelor of Science in Public Health with an emphasis on Asian American community health from San Francisco State University. At the university, I was the vice president of the Health Education Student Association and a student ambassador for the Health Promotion and Wellness Center, where I worked along a lot of different faculty and campus students just to improve the overall health of the campus community. I worked on a lot of different projects. So I enjoy cooking, reading, and finding new music to listen to. So if anybody has any Spotify recommendations, please come let me know after this is over. And my CFAR goal is to learn about HIV among PWID through risk environment framework and cluster analysis. And I'm also an aspiring biostatistician. So a little bit about the study setting. So Ciudad Juarez is a part of a metroplex with El Paso, Texas, and Las Cruces, New Mexico. It's a city with rich history and a lot of just great culture. So it's a sprawling region with about 2.7 million residents. It's a transient border, so there's like 35,000 daily border crossings. Politically, there's about 6,000 asylum seekers. There's, because of like a lot of historical violence and corruption also, but there's high rates of drug trafficking, and the rate of injection drug use is like 2 times the national average. But a fun fact about Ciudad Juarez is the first meeting between the President of the United States, William Howard Taft, and Porfirio Diaz from Mexico happened in October 16, 1909 in Ciudad Juarez. Before it was known as Ciudad Juarez, it was known as El Paso. So interesting, and it's the event is known as the most eventful diplomatic event in history of the two nations. So it's a really important part of both of U.S. and Mexico. So more about just the background of the people who inject drugs in Ciudad Juarez. So the population, there's about 10,000, so 90% of whom who use opioids in Ciudad Juarez, and HIV prevalence is 7 to 11%, and HCV prevalence is 70%. So the global prevalence of people who inject drugs is 5%, so it's higher than that. So for my research, I was using the conceptual framework of HIV risk environment, which was proposed by Rhodes and colleagues. So it argues that HIV risk is not only individual behavior, but also behaviors, but also exogenous and endogenous factors which affect HIV risk. So the middle wheel depicts the intersection of the exogenous and endogenous factors coming together to create risk and protective behaviors. So I'll just be going over some of these factors here. So physical environment is fixed or tangible features surrounding a person. Social environment is networks, healthcare providers, gender inequalities, violence. Economic environment is financial barriers, so cost of living, buying injection, and things like that. And finally, political environments, which is laws that criminalize communities, policing, and things like that. So for my research, we found that PWID are often treated as a homogeneous group, which can lead to significant research gaps that fail to capture the diversity and complexity of this population. And so my research question is, what are the patterns of substance use among PWID and CEDAW Juarez and its association with HIV risk factors? For the purpose of this research, we were trying to get some data-driven insights for developing targeted public health interventions by using cluster and tailor preventions and intervention programs specific to the needs of and behaviors of each group. So this research draws from a study from the survey on HIV, HCV, and overdose, also known as Encuesta de VIH, HCV y sobre Dios. It's a quantitative survey conducted through the Proyecto Vida initiative. And the survey we got from community-based convenience sampling, and the inclusion criteria included participants must be 18 years or older, have recently injected drugs, reside in Juarez, speak Spanish, and willing to take some tests, as also answer some questions, and they were reimbursed with $20. So it's going to get a little technical, so bear with me here. So for the methods, we use something called, obviously I mentioned before, it's a hierarchical cluster analysis approach. So there are several directions that you can take this, but it's usually decided a priori, so it means before you do the analysis. And we will be using a bottom-up approach known as algorithmic hierarchical cluster analysis, pretty much just to like internally cohesive and externally isolated clusters. So in terms of machine learning, this is considered an unsupervised method where we input data and allow the machine to find patterns and insights without any human interference. So no one variable is put above any other. We use Euclidean distance measure and applied word method, which is so we can have minimum variance. And yeah, so the clusters are sum of squares should be small. And if none of that makes sense, I have an analogy for you. So the best analogy is putting oil in water. And when you put oil in water, as you can see, when you stir it, there's small clusters at the bottom here, but there we go, at the bottom here. But once you give it time, it all comes up and becomes one big cluster. So this is what we're saying. And the same thing happens with data here. So this is what we would get when we do a cluster analysis on R. So each of these lines is individual people, and like a family tree, they all come together and end up with one big group over here. So this is 2 months of work summarized in one slide, so sorry, but we used the entire sample, which is 149, and obviously we used RStudio to conduct the hierarchical cluster analysis. So we did data cleaning, which is, we selected variables that we wanted to look at, and then we identified distinct substance use profiles and correlate with HIV risk behaviors. Pretty much we just got our table and our clusters, and then we understand demographic behavior and characteristics, which means we analyze what we saw, try to find patterns. And then lastly, informed targeted intervention. We didn't really get to most of that, but we did try to come up with some suggestions for future research. Now for the fun part, the results. So yeah, so 86% of our survey participants were men, and most of them were cisgender. So the median age for the population was 45. They were 83.9% were less than high school educated. Thank God most of them had stable place to live, about 66.4%. And the modes of income, 20% were criminalized work, which is a lot. And then HIV positive was 4.7%. HCV positive, there was 81.9%. And the most commonly used drugs were heroin, sedatives, and crack cocaine, with most people just 100% using heroin. So this is kind of the one of our final results. And as you can see, we have 3 clusters over here, and we use 77 variables. We will go further into explaining what this shows. So for the results section, we have 3 different clusters here, and I just wanted to highlight some things that we found with group 3 is they're one of our youngest clusters. with a median age of 43. And it seems that we found some patterns that differentiates cluster 3 and have some differences between cluster 1, 2, and 3. So cluster 3 seem to have more than 3 income sources. They're like almost double of them were doing income from illegal work. And this is the audit score of how likely they were to be addicted to alcohol. There was 81% of them who were addiction likely, 83% of them who were using more than one substance of polysubstance use. Interestingly, 45% have knowledge of fentanyl, which is not really, it's not really common in Ciudad Juarez because it's not there yet out. And then injection with used syringes, 76% higher than other groups. Received money or goods for sex, 42%. HIV harm reduction barrier sum, which is we asked about how many different barriers they were experiencing, and about 50% of them said that they were experiencing more than 3 barriers. So as you can see, we seem to have some type of pattern with group 3 experiencing a little more of the risk behaviors and a little more of the barriers. So just we asked some questions about stigma. So 83% of them said that they were feeling rejected by friends, 81% saying they were rejected by family, and interestingly, 54% saying they were discriminated by medical providers and staff. Also, 90% of them feeling that they have to prove themselves, which is really interesting. These are just some HIV test results with 22.4% who were HIV positive, and 76% which were HCV positive. So as you can see, cluster 3 had we can see that some patterns are emerging from the percentages that we were looking at. So the HCA was successful and revealed 3 different clusters, each representing a unique subgroup, and the analysis provided a comprehensive understanding of these subgroups, which can be used to target public health interventions. And as I mentioned before, cluster 3 is identified as the youngest group and faces multiple factors, highlighting a need for tailored and aggressive early intervention strategies. Implications and future directions. I would mention again that cluster 3 consists of the youngest individuals. And if you have a limited budget, we should prioritize this group, funding early intervention strategies, mental health support, and harm reduction strategies that can yield long-term results. Future directions, we didn't really get any specific correlation or association with the group, but I would suggest a multiple logistic regression analysis would be impactful in deepening the understanding of risk factors effectively and so we can effectively tailor interventions. Limitations and conclusions, because we use HCA, which has a risk of overfitting. So when applied to small data or highly specific data set, it's hard to replicate the data. And so we can't really apply. We can do other analysis, but we can really apply the findings to other populations or settings. And with convenient sampling, it may introduce bias. So it doesn't really, it sometimes doesn't represent the full broader PWID population. So in conclusion, this analysis helped identify 3 distinct PWID subgroups, offering valuable insights for targeted intervention, but further research is needed to improve accuracy and applicability. And lastly, I would like to thank my mentor, Dr. Natasha Ludwig-Behring, who's right there, the Proyecto Vida team, study participants, the CFAR program, everybody at UCSF, SFGPH team, so Dr. John, Dr. Karina, Joseph, Lauren, thank you so much. My CFAR cohort, Alexis, Esme, Taku, Miriam, and Celia. And lastly, my family for keeping me sustained through this whole process. Thank you.
On Zoom, if you have a question, you can either type it in the chat or come on screen on camera and ask your question. Lauren will moderate the Zoom chat for those of you. But yeah, so let's get started with questions for Anshu here. Sophia.
I love this presentation. Highlight and draw attention to some of the differences you were observing with cluster 3 as compared to the other 2 clusters. As someone who really has a qualitative research background, I'm wondering with the clusters, were those geographical clusters or were those based on the variables that you were analyzing?
I think we were just analyzing them based on variables. We didn't use any
Okay, so it
geospatial
wasn't
analysis or-
nothing linked them otherwise in terms of geography or interesting. Yeah. Wow, that's really fascinating that you really found those differences there. And my other question would just be if you got into any other like did you look at, for example, sexual orientation or that in terms of demographics collected?
No, we were just looking at it based on variables, so we didn't really do any other like specific analysis. So yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Great work.
I did have a question. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much. I'm curious, at some point you said that the cluster 3 group had like more barriers, and I honestly don't know what that means. Can you explain what that means? Like more than 3 or less than 3 barriers to what? I'm curious.
So in HIV risk behaviors, we talk about harm reduction barriers. So this is barriers in receiving care or receiving some type of just assistance. So we asked about barriers including transportation, getting to care, or barriers including childcare, or barriers including time. So that's what. Thank you.
And there's a question in the Zoom from Amelia. She says, very nice work. Was the data used cross-sectional? I'm wondering if you considered more longitudinal data for predicting who may join these cohorts at later stages. Just thinking there may be opportunities to identify at-risk individuals as early as possible.
Yeah, I think for sure for the next time, I think cross-sectional or longitudinal, either way, I think both of those collection methods would work. But since we were just using convenience sampling, I think we didn't really look at like, obviously there is space for more research to be done here.
So next we will transition to Mariam Izadwar. And Mariam, you can come up. Who's going to be talking about her summer research project on quantification of BRCA7 in human tissue using LC-MS/MS. Mariam.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Miriam, and I'm very excited to present my project titled Quantification of BRCA7 523LS in human tissue using LC-MS/MS technique. I had the privilege of working with Dr. Emilia Deichmann, who was my mentor for this project. This slide outlines the basic flow of my presentation slides. So first, I'll start with a brief bio, and then I'll move on to the background and research objectives, results, and finally, I'll end my presentation with the applications of this project. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you a bit more about myself. I'm a master's student at San Francisco State University, and my major is biochemistry. So I'm currently working in Dr. Anderson's lab, in which I'm investigating new approaches and creating new modulators for treating cystic fibrosis. So I'm basically working in a drug discovery lab. I'm very passionate about infectious disease, drug discovery, HIV cure, and immunology. And my goal is to pursue a doctorate degree in biochemistry or biomedical science. The reason that I joined CIFAR was because I wanted to learn techniques in a translational lab, and also to learn about different strategies of HIV cure. For background, my topic involves broadly neutralizing antibodies. In short, we call them BNAbs. So broadly neutralizing antibody is a key therapeutic of interest for HIV cure. So they're a type of highly potent IgG that can recognize and block many different strains of HIV from entering healthy cells. And they're also considered new approach for preventing, treating, and potentially eradicating HIV-1 infection. But the reason that newly scientists care about BNAbs is because they have important features that include a longer half-life, excellent safety, and they also engage the host immune response. But what class of BNAbs are we working on for this project? So we're working on WRCO7-523LS, which is a BNAP that targets the HIV-1 CD4 binding site. This class of BNAPs belong to the VRCO1 antibody class, and it's shown that they have broad and potent neutralizing activity against 96% of a large panel of viral strains. However, the gap in the data and literature is that there is no information about whether BNAPs stain the tissue and maintain their antiviral effects. And to be able to answer this question, first we need to know how we can quantify BNAPs in tissue. So currently, the predominant method for quantifying antibodies is ELISA, enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. So it's basically a plate-based assay technique, which is designed for detecting and quantifying antibodies, peptides, proteins, and hormones. And it's got lots of attention, specifically in scientific research, because it's strong, it's a simple technique, and also it's a very cost-effective technique. However, the problem about ELISA is that it's got so many drawbacks. So one of the major drawbacks is the limited applicability of ELISA. Because when we have when the sample volume is low or the analyte concentration is low, ELISA is not doing a good job. And also, ELISA is known for having an extreme matrix effect. So we need a technique. So we need a technique that is more specific for BNAP measurement. And we think that technique is LC-MS-MS assay. So LC-MS-MS assay is an analytical chemistry technique that combines the physical separation with the detection afterwards. So why we like LC-MS? The reason is it's a very specific method. It can distinguish closely related analogs from each other. It has a very less matrix effect. It's a repeatable technique, which means that we can repeat it over and over again. And also, it's a very, very sensitive technique. So low sensitivity and low specificity, as well as high matrix effects, are the drawbacks of ELISA that we think mass spectroscopy could potentially overcome in the future. But just like any other methods, LC-MS-MS has its own drawbacks. So the major drawback is it might quantify the BNAP that is bound to the virus instead of the free BNAP in the tissue. So in this project, we want to measure the amount of free BNAPs in the tissue, not the ones that are bound to the virus. So this might be a problem, and this might affect our results. And of course, additional tests will be needed in that case. So my research question is, are BNAPs accumulating in tissue and maintaining their antiviral effects even when plasma levels are undetectable? And if yes, are we able to measure the amount of BNAP in the tissue? And therefore, my research objectives are, first, to develop a highly specific and sensitive LC-MS assay for BNAP measurement in the tissue, and of course, to use LC-MS-MS technique to quantify BNAPs for clinical applications in people living with HIV. So the first thing I'll take you through before sample preparation is how we select the peptide that is unique. So if you look at the screen, you can see that the antibody is a very big molecule. And we needed to understand which part of this antibody is unique to this class of antibody. So one of our group members, Lance, and also the other group member from Henrich group, David, did a sequence alignment, and they understood that the part which is highlighted in yellow is the part of this antibody which is unique to only this class of antibody. So we needed to find a way to be able to cut the antibody into fragments and get the part that is unique to this class of antibody. And also, another thing is that our LC-MS machine, the optimal peptide length for our LC-MS machine is 8 to 15 amino acids with a size ranging from 700 to 1500 Daltons. So we have to be within this range. So first we tried trypsin, but we got a higher length and weight than we expected. So it was too large for the capacity of our LC-MS machine, and it turned out that trypsin was a no-go. So later on, we tried glucose, and glucose gave us the size just under 1500. It just gave us a mass of 1472, which was great. and it seemed that it worked well. So now that we know how we will cut the antibody, it is easy to just like create a methodology for sample preparation. So to make the samples ready for analysis, the first step is denaturation. So this protein is a very, very complicated protein, and we needed to unfold it. So that's the reason that we denature it at first. Later on, we continue with reduction, in which we just break the disulfide bonds. The third step is alkylation, in which we cap the SH groups that we have from the previous step. And later on, we continue with digestion. Basically, we use Glucy, just a technique that I explained in the previous slide for this step. And then later on, we acidify to stop the reaction. Just right before LCMS-MS analysis, we perform a C18 solid phase extraction to reduce the matrix effect and the background noise. And finally, we get ready for LCMS-MS analysis. Okay, now let's take a look at the results we've got using a clean sample of just the antibody. In the top panel, we have the standard peptide, and in the bottom panel, we have the BNAP sample that we extracted the peptide from. So it is showing signal over time, which means that the x-axis is showing time in minutes, and the y-axis is showing counts per second. So if you look at the shapes of these two peaks, you can see that they almost look the same, which means that our assay was successful. However, if you look at the height of the peak, you can see that the peak for the standard peptide is almost at 9,000, but the peak for BNAP sample is almost at 4,500. So which tells us that with a clean sample of just the antibody, we got approximately 50% recovery. Of course, we have to run experiments to make sure that the recovery is consistent across the concentration range that we're interested in. Of course, additional tests are needed, but at least this has given us hope that this assay is working. So we're seeing a good, decent peptide peak that shows this method was successful in being a highly specific assay for BNAP measurement in a tissue. However, the yield is not within the realms of acceptable for what we're looking for currently, and of course, further optimization is going to be needed. This research has the ability of answering a very important question in the field of HIV research. And the question is, if the post-treatment control that we saw before is related to the persistence of the BNAP in the tissue, or maybe some other immune-related mechanism is responsible for this post-treatment control that we see. And also another thing about this research is that this research is very, very novel. So we're the first lab who's doing this, and it's never been done before. So it's a priority for NIH Clinical Pharmacology Group to develop a highly specific method for highly specific BNAPs. As for the implications, so just like I said in the previous slide, this project has the ability to answer a very fundamental question, if BNAPs stay in the tissue or not. And also, ELISA is a traditional method for quantifying BNAPs and has been used till now. But there is a need for a more specific assay that would be more specific to BNAPs. So this method can actually replace ELISA in the future because it's much faster, and also it's a repetitive technique, which means that we can repeat it over and over again in less time. Next steps include validating the data on real human tissues. Of course, we need to optimize a protocol to get a better yield because our yield currently is not acceptable. And also we need to, if we get a better yield and if we be able to optimize the protocol, of course, we're planning to take the data from this assay and apply it to modeling aspects. Of course, during this project, we had some limitations, including long time needed for each step. So we were trying to develop something that is novel. So every step needed a long time. And also another concern about our research is the low yield that we have currently. There are like two more limitations that we might face later, which is related to our LCMS machine. So the resolution of the peak and sensitivity of the peak might be a problem later when we're trying on real human tissues. So in conclusion, this project is an important step in developing LCMS method to quantitate BNAPs and tissues during a clinical trial. I learned a lot. During this program, I spent my time developing mass spec method to quantitate a therapeutic protein in tissue, and I learned how to work with LCMS machine. I learned how to perform a solid phase extraction, which I never did before. And also, I learned a little bit about dry lab and like I learned how to work with RStudio. I never had the experience of this before. So lastly, I want to acknowledge my mentor, Dr. Amelia Deichmann, and I want to acknowledge Drug Research Unit, specifically Mohammed Rahman, who helped me a lot in creating this presentation, Lance, Lushane, and Florence. And also I want to acknowledge UCSF CPAR Scholars Program Directors, John, Karina, Lauren, and Joseph. Thank you very much for being there whenever I needed you. And also I want to acknowledge my friends from CPAR and CPAR Scholars. Well, this work is funded by AIDS Research Institute. And thank you very much for listening. Let me know if you have any. Yes, of course. So matrix effects means the background noise that we have when we get the chromatograph. So we're trying to reduce it using our LCMS technique.
Hit the button first. Hit the button on the mic.
Thank you, Lauren. Other questions? Fiani?
Yeah, that's a nice work that you've done within a very short period of time. So have you considered like sample preparation, maybe something like, I know that there is something like a magnetic solvent extraction that you can do. In this way, you can actually concentrate like your lights, and then it will increase your sample recovery when you do the LCMS.
Yeah.
Have you considered that?
Yeah, this project is an ongoing project, so we haven't thought about it. But thank you so much for the suggestion. I'll definitely like try what you said, and I'll definitely explore it more.
Do we have any questions on Zoom? Yeah. Other questions? Great. Oh,
Thank you for your talk. That was very interesting. This may be, way out there, but I'm hearing from people who work on drug resistance that HIV becomes resistant to BNAbs real easily. Do you know anything about that in relation to this particular one?
I actually didn't like try doing anything related to drug resistance and the BNAbs. What we were trying to do was to measure the BNAbs in the tissue and to be able to understand if they stay in the tissue after they're like doing their job. But no, I mean, I I guess I don't think I have the answer for your question about the drug resistance, but yeah, maybe my mentor can help this.
Hi, yeah, no, so this one, it doesn't tend to have as much resistance as some of the other, like I feel like the CD4 binding site, I'm not a drug resistant expert either. So, but I feel like the CD4 binding site antibodies, especially like the VRC, which are developed by the Vaccine Research Centers, tend to have less resistance than some of the other antibodies that have been developed. So, but I think it's something that we really need to be thinking about, and it's also something at the front of our minds in terms of as these antibodies get more widely used, not just in clinical trials, but now there's several under development by Gilead. They're being used in prevention. There are going to be people that might receive them for prevention. Then maybe they go on to get HIV at one point, and then they may be treated with them. And so I think that's something that people are starting to think about. And that's also why the work Marianne did is so important and contributed to, is because we're going to need to be able to differentiate between like any sort of residual antibody from that might be left over from previous courses, which we don't expect there to be, but there is some thought that people think that there's some kind of like depot residual. So yeah. We don't know, but very important question.
thank you, Amelia. And thank you, Miriam. Congratulations. So next, I have the pleasure of introducing Esme Gleason. Please come up, Esme, whose talk is titled Symbiotic Relationship Between Researchers and Participants.
Hi, everybody. Okay. Mm, My name is Esme. Good morning, everybody. So, sorry. Okay, so today I will be discussing the symbiotic relationship between researchers and participants, specifically in the context of community-based research project. My mentor is Dr. Sophia Zamidio Haas. And so just a brief bio about myself. I'm a fourth-year senior at San Francisco State University. I'm a biology major. I'm an SF Field alumni. And my current project is the Sex Work Lived Experience Outreach program, which is shortened to SW Learn, and it's the parent project of Sheroes. And I enjoy poetry, going to museums, and music. And then my CBAR goal was to gain qualitative study design and interviewing skills in the context of an ongoing community-based research study. And then just a brief bio of the parent project itself. It's the Sex Work Experience Outreach Project, and the goal is to strengthen cross-sector collaboration, centering BIPOC trans women who have experience in sex work in the Los Angeles County area, using community-based participatory methods. And the timeline is from 2022 to 2026. And the focus of the project is to try to adapt the Sheroes intervention for BIPOC trans women in the sex trade in Los Angeles County. And just some background, the Sheroes intervention is a community-driven social support system meant to help reduce risk behaviors and improve healthcare engagement among trans women. And then the participating people who are involved are the Trans Latina Coalition, Sex Workers Outreach Project, and then UCLA and UCSF. Okay, and then community-based research, unlike the traditional model, it really aims to empower community members by giving them a voice and ownership of the research. And this approach is more likely to be culturally sensitive and find more relevant information that pertains to the direct population. And so the benefits kind of extend beyond the participants, but I really want to focus on how can it benefit the researchers, because we know how it benefits the participants. We've seen the work, X, Y, and Z, but how does it benefit the researchers as well? So that's really like the main focus of my topic. And so my research seeks to try to understand the benefits that the researchers gain when they work with vulnerable populations. Specifically, I am trying to see how if you engage in a community-based project with the trans community, how that may shape or shift their perception of community and belonging, X, Y, and Z. And so why I'm doing this is to show that these projects have more value than just pouring into that specific population. I'm trying to show that there is a mutual benefit so that there can hopefully be more funding towards these projects, because it's not only going to help the participants, but also the researchers. And so to explore this, I conducted a cross-sectional qualitative study, designing and piloting an interview guide, and I used purposeful sampling to select participants based on their role in the project, focusing more on the role, because typically the higher the role someone is in a project, the more experience they have. And I really wanted the experience aspect when conducting the interviews, just to really get into like the nitty gritty. And I chose to focus particularly with cis people, specifically because it's a fresh perspective, because this whole thing deals with the trans population. So I thought that if I had a lot of, not a lot of, but some people who are cis, I could gain a fresh perspective compared to only doing trans people. And so, and then oh, sorry, got ahead of myself. And then they were conducted via Zoom. I sent out an invitation, or actually, so my PI sent out the invitation, and then I sent a follow-up email just to confirm with dates and time slots, and I did, and then I did include incentives. So yeah. And so the development of the interview guide began with identifying the objectives, which is understanding the symbiotic nature of the researcher-participant relationship, especially in niche populations. And so I conducted a literature review to try to identify key themes and gaps. And then I developed domains based on those gaps to kind of examine, to find, excuse me, to try to find what I needed to examine and specifically hone in on certain questions. And so, and then I did a pilot testing with a small sample to kind of refine the questions first before I really started to conduct the interviews, just so I can see, just to see if I had to shorten any questions, take out questions. And so here are some example questions. And so you can see right here that I have the domains listed just to give you a better visual. And so one of the questions is, how has your involvement in this project affected your personal life and outside of this project? And so these were just meant to really get details from their experience based on this project and see how that carried over into their personal lives as well. And so part of the interview process and techniques was to conduct via Zoom, and then I did a semi-structure for some guidance, but also to do some spontaneous questioning as well, because sometimes there's really good questions that come up just through conversation and not directly from the interview questions that you had already selected. And so I employed techniques to get details. An example is someone said that they felt a particular type of way. And so I then specified, and I was like, okay, can you expand on that? Can you tell me about what you mean by that specific word? And so here are the demographics of the study. And then I said that we did use cis people plus trans people. And so we had an array of demographics. We had Latinas, we had whites, et cetera. And then I tried to put people who had a important role for the project, such as the policy coordinator, study coordinator, the PI, et cetera. And so we haven't completed formal coding yet, but preliminary findings from these suggest that they do experience significant personal and professional growth from their involvement in this project. For example, someone found that the project reinforced the importance of having those directly affected in higher roles of the project. In this case, it's with trans people. And so I'm going to read a quote from them. And they said that it is not important enough to have people who are cis, who care about trans people. You have to have trans people in the room, because having best intentions and heart is not enough. And I do want to note that this does not apply to just trans people. This applies to anybody who is a part of a vulnerable population, and they need to be in the rooms and they need to be in high positions so that they can see the change and be the change as well. So I wanted to just highlight that as well. And then as part of my discussion, so I said that it suggests the existence of a symbiotic relationship between the researchers and participants. And then from this, I learned how to design and execute a qualitative research study, which was really important to me because I've literally never done this before. So it was really important to me to like do this, and I'm just so happy. So yeah. And then as far as the next steps and the implications, my study showed that they gain interpersonal benefits from the research process. And this is as important for how people design and study and design and fund the research for marginalized populations. And so my study highlights that people can gain significant, and sorry, when I say people, I mean the researchers gain significant professional and interpersonal benefits when engaging with these populations. Therefore, to allow more researchers to experience these benefits, studies focusing on at-risk populations should receive increased funding. And yeah, so that was kind of the implications. And then the next step is that more studies similar to this should be conducted. However, to collect an array of data, it should focus on different populations, such as substance abuse users, people from foreign countries, etc. So not just focusing on like trans people, but also focusing on different populations as well. And then the primary limitation was a small sample size, and that was primarily because some people didn't respond to my email, which is totally fine, but that was kind of a setback because because I think it was 4 out of 7 people who I had the chance to interview. So not much, I mean, I did collect a lot of data, but again, it's a small sample size, so it's not as much as I could have gotten. And then my conclusion is that it highlights the mutual benefits of community-based research, demonstrating that such projects not only empower certain populations, but also profoundly enrich the professional and personal lives of the researchers involved. And then I want to acknowledge my mentor, Sophia. She helped me so much at this whole process. I couldn't do it without you. I want to acknowledge the parent study. I want to acknowledge the participants, CFAR program, John, Lauren, Karina, and Joseph, and my CFAR cohort, Alexis, Takru, Anshu, Miriam, and Celia. So that's all. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Esme. That is your project is incredibly insightful and surprising, you know, to ask like, how are we benefiting non-financially? So I thought that was an incredible and unique question to ask. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Questions from the audience here about Esme.
Hi, I come from a background with no medical knowledge. I'm in marketing. So coming here is really awesome to learn so much. What benefits personally inspire you that you will take to your next journey?
Probably keeping an open minds, because coming into this project, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know who I was going to talk to. I didn't know how this whole process was going to go. So I want to say, I guess, keeping an open minds just to the possibilities of not finding, but just, yeah, just for the possibilities. So yeah, thank you.
Other questions? No? Seeing none. Okay, Natasha.
Hi, hold on. Hi, Esme. This was an awesome project, like
Thank
everyone
you.
has said. And it is hard to do qualitative work. And your population that you picked, researchers, no walk in the park. We're the worst participants, I feel like. So everyone fill out their survey today on behalf of CFAR scholars and Lauren. But no, this was incredible work to, start to finish, like doing the interview guide, recruiting people, like you were really hands in and,
Thank you so
did
much.
everything. What might be interesting, I don't know, it's more of a comment maybe for you and for the participants to maybe think about is like, these are some hard topics that people are working on. And so it might be part of your resilience theme or your bucket that you had, but like, what do people do as far as self-care and how they, everyone needs a break and needs an outlet. And so maybe, maybe just looking into mental health and also for yourself as well. Cause someone might unload, they were part of a project and they had a difficult participant and might unload something on you. So just, thinking about the mental health piece.
Thank you so much. That was a really, really great point. Thank you.
All right, congratulations, Esme.
Thank you.
Great. So I thank you. These have been such fantastic presentations. We're going to move to our next two presentations. So the next speaker is Alexis Leva, and her talk is on, hold on, we're excited. Is on, oh, hold on. Oh, suspense. Okay, so her talk is on using natural language processing to examine stigmatizing language in electronic healthcare records among Latinx sexual minorities. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the introduction, Karina. So, yes, to reframe, my name is Alexis Leva, and today my symposium will be about using natural language processing to examine stigmatizing language in electronic healthcare records among Latinx sexual minorities. So I would like to begin by sharing a little bit about myself. So I am born and raised in Sacramento, California. I am a second-generation Mexican American with origins in Michoacan, Mexico, and Juarez. I began working in HIV prevention and treatment in 2023 with the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, where I was an HIV, STD, and STI test counselor. The SFAF provided me a great support system, and they allowed me to gain my CPT-1 license and become a phlebotomist. I'm entering my 4th year at San Francisco State University, and I have aspirations of becoming a nurse with clinical and research interests in infectious disease and sexual health. To just kind of give some context, this is me and my scrubs, me in Sacramento, where I was born and raised, in my beautiful family. From left to right, my mom, Norma, my sister, Alicia, and my dad, Salvador. So I would like to begin by addressing how HIV disproportionately affects Latinx communities in the US. Latinx people make up about 19% of the US population, but they make up 29% of new HIV infections annually. This has been found to be associated to stigma related to socioeconomic status, language barriers, and discrimination, which can limit healthcare access and engagement in queer Latinx populations. Additionally, provider-level stigma and stigmatizing language in healthcare can also impact sexual health treatment and health outcomes. Given the differences in resources, Provider level stigma can look different in different areas of the US. However, San Francisco is not exempt to this. I know that in my own personal experience, I've observed members of the Latinx queer community express anxiety and mistrust based on negative previous experience, even here in San Francisco. However, evaluating how stigmatizing language is used within healthcare can help us address where this occurs, and examining electronic healthcare records to identify stigmatizing language can be a great strategy to do this. To continue, stigmatizing language within electronic healthcare records can create a bias against clients seeking care by influencing a clinician's perception of said client. One strategy to address this is to directly quote the client to ensure the words are captured in the patient's own voice. However, manually reviewing records to evaluate trends of stigmatizing words within electronic healthcare records are not only time-consuming, but resource-intensive. Therefore, the use of natural language processing is not only cost-effective, but can produce a large-scale data analysis in a timely manner to understand how stigmatizing language presents itself within this specific environment. The objective of this study is to identify and understand the context of how stigmatizing language is used within electronic healthcare records within the continuum of care for Latinx sexual minorities. The goal of the study is to identify findings that can inform us of aspects of care that needs to be improved, specifically around care that creates safer stigma-free environments for our queer Latinx clients. The methods utilized within this study begin with accessing de-identified notes via UCSF's Patient Explorer and Immerse database, which is shown below. This includes identifying Latinx sexual minorities by documented sexual orientation and Latinx ethnicity identifiers. The Immerse database was then used to search clinical notes of the collected de-identified MRNs using specific stigmatizing language that was identified by the NIAID language guide. We aim to identify qualitative themes explaining the context of stigmatizing language in EHR data by focusing on the terms prostitute, sexual preference, and addict from the NIAID language guide. These terms appeared in the records of 47 out of 4,178 queer Latinx individuals. We randomly selected 20 de-identified notes for qualitative analysis, stored them securely, developed a codebook through team consensus, and used Deduce for analysis, ensuring unbiased coding and agreed upon themes. First, I'd like to preface by saying that this study is in its early stages, but I'd like to present some preliminary findings. One context theme that has emerged is one that we call social history description quoted. This means that the stigmatizing word or phrase is present within the EHR as quoted text within the client's social history as the client's own words or stated phrase. An example phrase that highlights the context code is the second quote listed under addict, which states, "Her mother and her do not get along. She relates that her mom is a heroin addict and has been since she was about 18 years old." As you can see, the term addict is presented as a quoted phrase, suggesting that the term is the client's own words used to describe their own social history. Alternatively, another context theme that was identified is called social history description unquoted. This means that stigmatizing word or phrase is present within the patient's EHR as unquoted text, meaning it is unclear if it was mentioned via the patient or clinician's own words. An example phrase that highlights this context code is the quote from the sexual preferences category, which states, "Appropriate dress, acne on face, engaged, opened up to writer about his major stressors, 70% related to feeling his family doesn't understand his sexual preferences." As you can see, the term sexual preference is not within quotes, so therefore it is unclear if the term sexual preference was used by the provider to describe the client's social history or if the term was used by the client to describe their own social history. We next sought to use the embedded NLP query parser to conduct a second exploration of Immerse database and further identify how related stigmatizing language can be present within the electronic healthcare records. We accomplished this by programming customized queries using the Apache Lucene 8.9.0 query parser API package within the Immerse interface. We utilized Boolean, phrase, wildcard, and range queries to enhance the precision and flexibility of the search operations for the related terms of interest. This slide shows the prevalence of related stigmatizing words identified using the NLP query parser. Initially, 47 out of 4,178 clients had stigmatizing language in their EHRs with the original terms. After expanding the terms, the number of patients with stigmatizing language increased to 147, with the highest occurrences between 2019 and 2022. Future work will focus on identifying additional qualitative context codes for these related terms and verifying true or false positives in the EHRs. This study aims to identify and understand the use of stigmatizing language by providers in electronic health records for Latinx sexual and gender minorities. Preliminary findings suggest that such terms are mostly found in the social history sections of EHRs, often either quoted from the client's own words or unquoted, making it unclear if they originate from the client or the provider. The presence of stigmatizing words has also increased over time, suggesting a need to understand the cause of this trend. The study's NLP methodology is still in development, but it has proven effective in identifying stigmatizing language more efficiently than manual searches, suggesting its potential for large-scale analysis. When considering implications in future directions, we can begin the implementation process by ensuring clinicians remove their own bias by using descriptive language, quoted statements, and person-forward language. This can be ensured by expanding stigmatizing language terms via EHR, providing examples for inclusive language, and exploring the association between prevalence of stigmatizing language and sexual health treatment outcomes. This study has limitations that are unclear if stigmatizing language is quoted or unquoted, which may be related to dictation technology or local documentation practices. NLP results may vary depending on the API used, and the study's findings are preliminary and may change with further analysis. In conclusion, stigmatizing language can appear at various points in the care of queer Latinx individuals, and EHRs are one such medium. Healthcare providers should be aware of the potential harm of such language and prioritize precision in their documentation. Therefore, I would like to thank the directors of CFAR, Karina, John, Joseph, and Lauren for providing this amazing opportunity, and also my fellow CFAR scholars. I would also like to thank the San Francisco AIDS Foundation for jumpstarting my career in HIV and really providing me the love for HIV care. I would also like to thank my amazing mentor, Dr. Jose. He's awesome, and he literally shows me what dedication and hard work looks like and inspires me that Latinos can do anything. And I would also like to thank my amazing team member, Liz Nguyen, and Liz was just super awesome, being supportive all the way. And I would also like to thank my friends and my family that are here physically and over Zoom for supporting me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. That was amazing. We're going to open it up for any questions.
I have a question. Did you do any normalization of the increased numbers of encounters or patients with stigmatizing language, and then just also the number of encounters or patients that happened at that time? I wonder if more people identified as queer,
Yeah, so we basically went and used the immersed data, and it was out of a pool of about 4 million people. So out of the 4 million, only 4,178 identified themselves as queer and also Latinx. When we were also scoping the data manually at the beginning, there was a lot of occurrences, but it seemed to be repeat, such as just attached through the document. So we really had to come through that. But I think with further investigation, there would probably be more.
John has a question.
Thank you, Alexis. Great talk. Have you and the team or Jose talked about sort of explanations for, there's so many. I'm thinking COVID was right in the middle and everybody was stretched thin. And then when your cognitive sort of capacity is sort of depleted in the sense of working really long, it's stressful for everybody in the clinic. that you are likely more prone to stereotyping or more prone. So is there any explanation you're thinking in terms of maybe if there was a true trend upward, why that might be the case?
We we're trying to theorize that. It wasn't exactly defined, but one thing that I can definitely theorize is maybe with just like more Zoom videos and then like Zoom being able to be more documented, I feel like that possibly could be a reason why there's an uptake of more stigmatizing language. But that is something that we are going to further analyze.
Thank you so much. I'm sure there's more burning questions, but we'll have time after the talk. And now we're going to move to the last talk of our session. But I'm thrilled to introduce Takuzwa Chirenge, who will be sharing her talk, which is entitled HIV CRISPR Screen for Identifying Host Factors in a Primary Cell Model.
Short people problems. So good morning, everyone. I'm extremely excited to have this opportunity to present my summer research to you all. I'm Taku Chirenge. Today I'll present my work on HIV CRISPR screen for identifying host factors in a primary cell model. So just a brief bio about myself. I was born and raised in Harare, Zimbabwe, and I'm currently studying the evolution of HIV drug resistance using a phylogenetic approach for my master's in cell and molecular biology at San Francisco State University under my PI, Dr. Pluni Pennings in the Code Lab. And my goal in the CIFO program is to gain wet lab experience since I'm in a fully computational lab at the moment. And this will help me prepare to pursue a PhD, hopefully in biomedical sciences, focusing on HIV and immunology. So this slide outlines the basic flow of my presentation today. I'll be guiding you through each part as we go along. So yeah, let's dive in. So ART has transformed HIV into a manageable chronic condition, but it cannot eliminate latent HIV in these reservoirs shown on the right in this schematic here. And this then prevents a cure and lifelong treatment is then required. So CD4 T cells represent a major barrier to the HIV cure, and a subset of these cells are key HIV reservoirs. And memory T cells are important HIV reservoirs, and it has been found that long-lived memory T cells harbor latent HIV. So our research focuses on a subset of these memory T cells, specifically CD127 plus T memory cells that are critical to understanding how HIV persists. So different memory T cells respond differently to HIV. However, a vast majority of CD4 plus T cells reside in tissues, and these cells are phenotypically distinct from those in the blood. So more importantly, they are a major contributor to viral persistence, making it relevant to target HIV persistence in the tissue compartment. So in the Rowan lab, which I'm in, they developed an ex vivo tonsil model, which upon infection with HIV expressing heat stable antigen, HSA, they found CD127 plus T memory cells preferentially undergo latent HIV infections with high levels of integrated HIV DNA, as seen in the figure here to the right. But these cells do not have any virion production. So given this context, we sought to understand which host factors restrict HIV in these cells by asking the following research question. Our research question is, which host factors drive HIV restriction in CD127 plus T memory reservoir cells? And my project goal was to utilize CRISPR-Cas9 screening to identify virus-host interactions in a tissue model of HIV persistence. So the main aim was to establish experimental conditions of CRISPR-Cas9 screening in the tonsil model. So let's dive into the first section of my methods. So conventional CRISPR-Cas9, as demonstrated in this schematic, it's a gene editing technique frequently used to edit cell lines. However, it has limited efficiency in primary human resting T cells. So this project focuses on two sub-aims found at the beginning of the conventional CRISPR-Cas9 pipeline, as you can see. The first is to assess the effect of T cell activation, and the second sub-aim is to assess the effect of Cas9 RNP electroporation on these T cells. So we wanted to determine if the conventional CRISPR-Cas9 panel on the top schematic holds true in the tonsil system. So we want to apply this to this tonsil model by breaking down tonsils into chunks first, and then into a single cell suspension. And then we then performed a fecal centrifugation, and followed by either treating the cells with PHA-L2 or not treating them, and then assessing infectivity by treating the cells with F4 HIV expressing HSA or not treating them. And then we finally analyzed their phenotype using flow cytometry, as shown in the bottom right, in the bottom diagram. Now let's look at the results from the first sub-aim, which examined the effect of T cell activation on CD127 plus T memory cells. So these flow cytometry plots show the impact of PHA-L2 activation on CD127 plus T memory cells. So in the, So in the no stimulation condition that we can see over here, CD127 plus expression is relatively high at 31.1, as seen in the lower right quadrant. And then after 4 days of stimulation without rest, CD127 plus expression significantly decreases to 10.3, as seen in the middle plot. And then after 3 days of stimulation, followed by 4 days of rest, CD127 plus expression begins to recover, as seen by the increase to 33.5. So in this slide, I'll just orient you quickly. To your left is the condition without any activation, and to your right is the condition with activation. So we're trying to see the effect of activation on permissiveness to HIV infection. So without T cell activation, we can see that CD127 plus cells are likely to be productively infected. But with activation, you can see a modification in CD127 plus cells, making them more permissive to productive HIV infection, as seen by the differences in the quadrants with the red arrows. So based on our results from sub-aim 1, we found we don't need to activate the cells before we can proceed to electroporation and resting T cells. So since PHA and AL2 modifies the CD127 T cell phenotype, moving on to the second sub-aim, we'll focus more on the CRISPR-Cas9 electroporation of resting T cells from tonsils. So our CRISPR-Cas9 workflow here begins with assembling the ribonucleoprotein complex, combining Cas9 protein with guide RNA for targeted gene editing. We then prepare our tonsil cells and then introduce the RNP complex via electroporation. Then after electroporation, the cells are cultured for 6 days to allow recovery and gene editing to take effect. And then finally, we use flow cytometry to assess the gene editing efficiency and measure changes in the cell phenotype. So now let's look at the results from the second sub-aim, where we wanted to perform a proof of concept to show that gene editing by CRISPR-Cas9 electroporation could achieve highly efficient gene knockout in resting tonsils by modulating the expression of CD4 and CXCR4. So let's start by looking at the histograms on the left with CD4 on top, as you can see, and CXCR4 at the bottom. So these histograms show the expression levels of CD4 and CXCR4 in the cells. The first set of histograms compares non-target control cells with knockout cells. The peaks in the non-target control histograms represent cells that still express CD4 and or CXCR4, which are our target genes. So in contrast, the knockout histograms show a dramatic reduction in expression, as indicated by the shift in the peaks. And this shift tells us that a significant portion of the cells had their CD4 and CXCR4 genes successfully knocked out following electroporation. And the bar graphs that you can see provide a more quantitative measure of this knockout. We achieved a 91% knockout for CD4 and 99% knockout for CXCR4, which supports the visual data seen in the histograms. Together, these results confirm the high efficiency of our CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing protocol in these tonsil cells. So our findings show that T cell activation is not compatible with the maintenance of CD127 plus T cell phenotype, and that T cell activation with PHA-IL2 modifies the CD127 plus T memory cell phenotype, making these cells more susceptible to productive HIV infection. And finally, as a proof of concept, we demonstrated highly efficient CRISPR-Cas9 single gene knockout in resting tonsils without T cell activation, as illustrated by the 91% knockout of CD4 and 99% knockout of CXCR4. So looking forward in the future, we're looking to apply the activation neutral gene editing modality for a CRISPR-Cas9 screening in the tonsil-based model of HIV persistence. And some implications include having the potential to identify novel therapeutic targets for HIV treatment or eradication, and also contributing to gene editing strategies targeting HIV tissue reservoirs. And before concluding, I'd like to acknowledge those who've supported me throughout this summer research. I want to thank the UCSF CFAR Scholars Program, my mentor, who's been absolutely amazing, Ifani. He's really helped me throughout the semester, both in lab and personally. So I'm forever indebted, kind of. And just shout out to the whole of the Rowan Lab. They were extremely kind to me this whole summer, and I learned so much. Definitely Gradstone is an incredible place to be, so I was blessed for that. And also my CFAR colleagues for their support throughout this project. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. The data was so impressive. I'd love to see that knockout. So we have some time to open the floor for questions. Anyone have any questions for Taku? Yes, great.
Have you checked the cell viability after you did the electroporation? Because those are kind of harsh on the cell.
Oh, yeah. So that's one of the things that, we in the future want to improve. Cell viability was around 30%, around about, and that's not that good. So in the future, we'll try work on that.
Okay. And also, like, and the next question is like kind of related to this. Do you think those the electroporation and this CRISPR will affect the CD127 infection, like what happened with your activation?
Sorry, please say that again.
So do you think the electroporation will also affect how, like the CD127 cells being infected by HIV?
Maybe. I'm not 100% sure, but I do know electroporation itself is very harsh. So there is a possibility that there might be an effect that's seen just because of just how harsh it is on the cells. And tonsils are very delicate. It's not like, cell lines. It's a primary tissue. So yeah, most probably there will be a little bit of a difference.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question, if there's any.
Okay, I don't have a very serious question, but did we lose you to the wet lab side?
Maybe. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed this. I think I didn't have this side before. My undergrad is in microbiology, but yeah, I didn't have any HIV wet lab experience at all. So, learning how to culture cells, like, take care of them like they're babies, has been interesting. I got an appreciation about how much work researchers do in the lab. It's, yeah, admirable. So hopefully I can combine both the wet lab and the dry lab experience. And yeah, it's been good.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for, and thank you to the scholars for this amazing work. And thank you to the mentors also for being there and all your work as well. I'm gonna pass it back. to
So our
Jen.
lunch is a bit delayed. And so if you want to come back at 11:30, if you're in the building, then you can do that. Otherwise, for the scholars and mentors, we want to do pictures and certificates. And folks on Zoom, I think you probably don't need to watch us give certificates, so we'll probably end the Zoom at this point. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Again, we're really proud of this group and all the work the mentors done. This is an investment in time, but also the future. I think we truly believe these folks are the future of this work. So thank you for staying and attending. Please stay if you have time or come back for lunch. But again, thank you for coming, and thank you, Lauren, Joe, and Karina. So that concludes the seminar. Thank you.